Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Todd Huntley, who is the director of the National Security Law Program and a lecturer in law at Georgetown University Law Center. Todd is a retired Navy captain and served as an active duty judge advocate for more than 23 years. He has extensive operational law experience supporting the special operations community. Todd Huntley, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed the Cognitive Crucible, listening to it in the past, and am very happy to be here with you today.
All right. Well, welcome yourself to the Crucible. Here we go. The conversation that I'd like to have with you today, Todd, will cover legal matters related to information operations, and I'm sure you've got plenty to say along those lines. But before we get into these topics, could we please start by getting your assessment of our strategic landscape?
That's a great question, John. And I guess I would put it to paraphrase Churchill. Maybe we're at the end of the beginning. It seems like, I think finally the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, we're starting to find our feet in the information environment. We're starting to be a little more proactive. We've, both by law and policy, we've loosened up some of the authorities issues that I had faced when I was on active duty practicing in this area. And so I think we're finally realizing that if we are going to defend ourselves in the information environment and pursue our national security interest in this environment, we have to integrate our information capabilities, our cyber capabilities. It's not just a one-dimensional effort. And I think we're finally realizing that and putting it together.
I see. So we just read a moment ago in your bio that you have extensive legal experience with the special operations community. Could you please give our audience a little bit more background about your career?
Sure. So I guess I had been in for about 8 years when I received orders to go to U.S. Special Operations Command in Tampa. I arrived there kind of late in the summer. And so other JAGs had preceded me and been given their portfolios. And since I was the last one, this was summer of 2005, the staff judge advocate said, okay, you're going to have the cyber information operations and military information support operations portfolio.
Wow. Yeah.
And I said, great. Did you know that I used to be an actual enlisted Army Reserve psychological operations specialist? And the SJA, who later went on to be the Judge Advocate General of the Army, said, no, I didn't, but now that makes me look really smart, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
So for 3 years, from 05 to 08, I was at SOCCOM handling that portfolio. Obviously, for those of you who are listening, and were involved in the policy areas of information operations and PSYOP at the time. That was the effort. We were really trying to get online and go after the Al-Qaeda and extremist use of the internet. And so it really was kind of the opportunity. I got the opportunity to work on some of the earliest authorities, coordinating with the Pentagon, with the other combatant command staffs to try to, tackle that problem and get the psychological operations community, the authority to operate online, and kind of bring it into the 2000s, if you will. In addition to my 3 years at SOCCOM, I did 2 years as the staff judge advocate at Special Operations Central Command, and then 2 years in Washington, D.C., working in the attempt to stand up Admiral McCraven's Special Operations National Capital Region.
I see. So you're describing your early time at SOCCOM, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so you were working within SOCCOM, but also up and out, back into folks in DC. What agencies in DC did you interact with the most, would you say?
So mostly it was within DoD because we were working on the kind of the first trans-regional psychological operations program. And so I was working with the attorneys in the chairman's legal office, with attorneys in the DoD general counsel's office, and then somewhat with, I worked with some DOJ attorneys, some agency attorneys, but that was more on the cyber side, because the kind of at the same time, we were getting our first authorities to do some offensive cyber operations. And so on those, it was really more of an interagency coordination, whereas on the PSYOP side, it was mostly an internal DoD coordination.
Was the DoD Office of Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict stood up yet?
It was, but they had very little play in it, which, again, if you followed some of the recent conversations, has been a bone of contention by some, that they don't have enough oversight and kind of interplay on some of the development of policy. But no, we really did not coordinate with them.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. And then you retired. When did you retire?
So I retired in September of 2020.
Oh, wow. That's a little bit more recently than I would have guessed. Okay. And so then you're relatively new at Georgetown, and you're teaching some courses which help leverage your experience in the national security community. What are the courses that you teach? And also, what are the variety of students that tend to engage with your coursework?
Sure. So I teach, in fact, tonight I'm teaching a class that is titled Information Operations in the Cyber Age. This is the second year I've taught that. I teach, last semester I taught a national security law course, so an introductory level course on kind of, issues across the field. In the past, I've also taught a counterterrorism operations law and policy class, a legal issues in the gray zone class, and a law and ethics of special operations class. And so I would say the types of students who are in my classes are a combination of mid-career attorneys who are getting their Master of Law degree, many of whom are judge advocates across the services, as well as other government attorneys, and then JD students who hope, after they graduate and pass the bar, to go work primarily for the U.S. government, in one of the national security, fields and agencies that practice in that area.
Okay. So you've obviously been steeped in this and giving it a lot of thought for quite some time. And as I was doing a little bit of background for this discussion, I found a 2010 Navy Law Review article that you wrote. We'll have a link to it in the show notes if people want to go check it out. But 12 years old now, but this was called Controlling the Use of Force in Cyberspace. And in this article, you assert that while the threat to U.S. national security, I'm quoting you right now, while the threat to U.S. national security posed by cyber intrusions and attacks is widely discussed in both the government as well as the media, the U.S. continues to struggle to develop a cybersecurity strategy. So I guess I just wanted to use that as a 12-year-old touch point, and to ask you, if you can compare 12, 15 years ago to today, what's changed since 2010? And maybe more broadly, how has the law evolved in the area of information operations? So I'll just let you take that in whatever direction you think is productive.
Okay, great. A lot has changed. I think to go back to kind of your first question you asked, I think the U.S. government is finally developed a strategy and is constructively engaged in, effectively pursuing that strategy or implementing that strategy. Of course, at the time that I wrote that paper, that was during my own Master of Law studies that the Navy sent me to do for a year after Special Operations Command. So, I'd had 3 years of working on the issues, and the Navy specifically told me to look at cyber issues when I did my studies. We really were, as I mentioned, not integrating our capabilities. We very much had, joked and called them stovepipes of excellence, right? We often had people who had access online, but didn't have the authority to influence or to conduct some cyber operation because their original authority was very limited. And I think, we have solved that somewhat. I think the other thing that's developed is the delegation of authorities has gotten much better. At one time, if you wanted to do anything on the internet, it was very restricted. That has been pushed down, to a much more manageable level. And then the other thing I think is that's changed is, the passage of the FY19 and FY20 NDAAs. In the FY19 NDAA, they had section 1632, which addressed clandestine cyber operations. And then in the 20 NDAA, section 1631, which addressed clandestine operations in the information environment. When I was at SOCCOM, and then, at the time in 2010, other agencies and lawyers in the different agencies pushed back if we wanted to do anything in cyberspace, in the information environment, in a clandestine manner. They claimed it was a covert action that required a finding by the president. We claimed it was a traditional military activity. And with the passage, Congress implementing or passing those two different statutes, it did a lot to help DOD, again, convince the other agencies that this was something within DOD authorities, and that we were lawfully and within policy when we did that.
If I could put my operational hat on right now, I can envision the G3 or the G5, the operators wanting to do something that they believe would be a valuable part of whatever campaign they are conducting. And so they want to do X, and it has to get staffed, right? And so I can hear operators saying, and it's always legal, the SJA or the JAG is telling me that I can't do this. Is that the kind of thing that you would run into as a staff officer?
Oh, definitely. And the staff packages would come to my desk oftentimes, at the last minute, right before they had to be run into the CG. And, oftentimes the issue wasn't really a legal issue. It was more of a policy issue, or where we had to send it higher up the chain to get an approval, just that the commanding general at our level didn't have the authority to approve it himself. And of course, that never went over well. Usually, that was greeted, those words of advice were greeted with something like, Judge, why do you hate America?
Is that right?
Or it was all in good nature usually, but they were frustrated.
Sure.
And of course, as the JAG, my job was to, make sure the commander didn't do anything that stepped across the line. It was something that, even if I disagreed with it personally, if that was the policy, it was my job to make sure they knew that. And then we could, raise it up and forward it to possible approval up at the required level.
I see. So this maybe leads us into our next question, but as far as are those kinds of operational frustrations being addressed adequately? Or maybe asking a little bit slightly differently, are authorities to operate in the information environment or in the cyber environment, is decision making getting delegated down to lower levels than, say, the 2018-19 time frame when you were still on active duty.
Sure, yeah, it has. And from what I'm hearing, those issues have decreased, right? They're still there in some cases. There's still points of frustration at times, but things have gotten much better. I think, with the two NDAA sections that that I mentioned, with the new, President Trump, his National Security Policy Memorandum 13, which delegated some of the cyber authorities, both of those things, from what I've been told, have allowed us to become much more active in the information environment.
So what are, in your opinion, some of the more pressing legal challenges that we have today in countering disinformation, either in the national security context or social context, either way?
Yeah, so one of the issues is more kind of an internal domestic legal issue or policy issue, and that's the interagency fight. And so if we as the U.S. government and government workers, people in this environment, have long realized that the information environment is an important national tool to use, right? So if we think back to the acronym most of us learned early on in our careers, DIME, right? Yep. And you look across those four, and kind of setting aside the last three, Phil, that were added later, the information area is the one area where no one agency has the lead, right? Diplomatic, obviously the State Department; military, obviously DOD; economic, kind of a combination of Treasury and Commerce. But information, almost every agency in the U.S. government has a role to play. And certainly the big players are, state, DOD, and the intel community, CIA. And so where those lanes, the lanes in which they are supposed to swim isn't always clear.
Yeah, DHS too, right?
DHS now, right? DOJ obviously has somewhat of a role, especially when we're looking at cyber-enabled information operations. But that's one issue. So matching up the authorities with the capabilities is one thing I believe we could do much better on. Everybody likes to joke about how, DOD has all the money and the people trained to do these kinds of things, but they don't have the authority to operate in some of the environments or at certain times that perhaps we really need it now. And so, that's one of the areas. And it's an issue of fiscal law, making sure the right agency has the right kind of money to spend on this, making sure it has the other resources they need, and then making sure that, that interagency coordination is done.
Right. We had a number of episodes, some that come to mind with Mike Vickers and also former FBI agent Clint Watts. In both of those episodes, they highlighted what they called, I'm paraphrasing, but the security versus privacy trade-off. It's a really excruciating dilemma that we're facing, not only in the United States, but in the free world. But would you agree that there's a trade-off there, and what are some of the legal implications that are involved there?
I think that is one of our greatest legal challenges we face in becoming more effective in this area, in both engaging in our own operations as well as countering our adversaries. The privacy security balancing is really the heart of national security. I mean, that is really, one of the primary functions and why we have the balance of powers in the U.S. government is to strike the right balance in that area. With the rise of the internet and social media, you have domestic and international environments kind of coming together. It's difficult to separate them out. Legal issues related to intelligence oversight and collection of information on U.S. persons It's becoming much more challenging because of this merger of the international and domestic communication environments. It's the ability or the restrictions on the U.S. government to communicate with individuals, and then one of the most important ones, I believe, is the First Amendment. Right? How do we strike that balance in allowing U.S. citizens and people in the U.S. to speak freely, while also countering foreign disinformation? Right? So when that individual, online on Facebook posts a pro-Russian, meme or a bit of information, or repost, shares a bit of Russian disinformation, are they doing that because they know it's Russian disinformation, or are they doing that because in their heart they really agree with that opinion? And how do you differentiate that? Do we want to differentiate in those cases? I think that is one of the biggest challenges we face. And there's a legal part to it, there's a policy part to it, there's an educational part to it, I think. But that is one of, I think, the greatest challenges we face.
Right. Well, I mean, let me just ask you directly. I mean, where do you come down on it, or what do you think is likely to unfold in the near term or the midterm? Yeah. So after 9/11, we had very quickly a reaction to 9/11, which increased the security of the nation. What the Department of Homeland Security was created. There were various different laws. What the Patriot Act, was that
Patriot
it?
Act.
Some laws were very quickly enacted, and I think a lot of people would agree that, whoops, there might have been some overreach there. So it almost seems like there's a pendulum thing happening. I don't know. What do you think? Where do you think this is going?
No, that's definitely the case. If you look at the history of intelligence oversight and kind of intelligence oversight laws, it's a story of incident happening, overreaction, abuse or stepping too far over the line, the authorities you've been given, and then swinging back to being more restrictive. Incident happens, overreaction, right? And so that's really the cycle of our intel oversight history in the United States. The part of that challenge that I mentioned before is this separation between intelligence and operations. I saw it in special operations, but it's more pronounced in the information environment. How do you separate out intelligence activities from information operations, especially in the information environment where things are happening so fast, right, that they're so intertwined that oftentimes our attempt to step back and say, wait a minute, can this individual or this organization do this because this is really an intelligence activity and not an operational activity?
Right. And
so,
and even defining the operation or defining the ecosystem is hard in that boundaries between operational environments are blurry or ill-defined. You can make the serious argument that there are no more boundaries in the military conflict or great power conflict. The homeland is under attack right now, except it's not bullets, it's information rounds.
No, that's why I think this is going to be such a difficult issue to deal with because of that. People, the changing expectations of privacy, including with what people are doing online, is in direct contradiction to the need to collect intelligence on activities that are happening online. And we need to find a way to strike that balance, because obviously if if our adversaries are operating there, that's where we need to be keeping an eye on them. But at the same time, we're going to be collecting, otherwise lawful and totally legitimate activities being conducted by U.S. persons.
Right. And the days of geographically localized bad activity, whether it's a serial killer or a sexual offender or the extremist groups.
The extremism problem is driven, I think, a lot by this. Before, if you had somebody with an extremist view, they were on the soapbox in the town square and everybody knew, oh, that's just Joe, that's who he is. But now the Joe in each village can link up with all the other Joes in every other village, right? And kind of reinforce each other's extremist ideas and thinking, and reach other people who maybe are kind of on the line, right? Where in the past, the other community members would probably jerk them back in the line and say, hey, that's Joe. You don't want to listen to Joe. He's kind of out there.
Right.
So,
and then there's new capabilities coming online, like the metaverse, for example, right. and other things like the metaverse. We're going to have in a few weeks. I'm going to have Dr. Rand Waltzman back on the podcast to talk about his observations and about the metaverse. But so being able to immerse people in experiences like that, and these virtual communities with these visceral experiences and the cognitive effect of that, and being able to mobilize people in the real world based upon virtual or online activities. Not just like keyboard warriors, but like going from the keyboard into the real world to do real live stuff is just like mind blowing.
Yeah, January 6th, I think a lot of that was driven by that exact thing.
Yeah. So what are the legal impediments to the U.S. government engaging in information operations to further our national security interests?
So, a lot of this goes back to the Cold War, where, it was thought that, using information to try to persuade your own citizens is something that the communists do, right? Democracy does not do that. We don't use propaganda or use the government's resources and power to, persuade our own citizens. Another part of it was, hey, we have private media that, has the responsibility to give information to the population of the United States. The US government doesn't want to compete with these businesses in that area. And so you had restrictions, things like, language that's in a lot of the appropriations acts and authorizations that prohibit the use of the appropriated funds, to use in propaganda directed at the US population. The prohibition in 12333 and in the Covert Action Statute, 50 US Code 3093, that prohibit those types of activities directed at the US population. And just the fact that, there's really no authority for a government agency to do that. So you have, one, no affirmative authority, and two, no funding appropriated by Congress. In fact, just the opposite. You're restricted from using that.
What can the U.S. government do in order to help manage the problem? Not propagandizing our population, but another episode with a lady named Suzanne Spalding. She served in the Department of Homeland Security. She talked a little bit about civics and how can we legally or positively keep this American experiment together through like overt means?
Right. Education definitely is a big part of it. Another part of it, I think, is transparency, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see some of these social media sites. Twitter's the one that comes to mind immediately to me, where, a tweet by President Biden says U.S. government official now under it. You had, I don't know if it was Facebook or Twitter again, posts or tweets that were sent out by Sputnik or RT, were labeled as state-sponsored information. So letting the public know that this might not be a totally benign or totally even-handed bit of information. You may want to check it out a little bit, and then giving the people, the listeners, the readers, the tools they need to be able to discern that, to educate themselves and figure out where to go to check to make sure the information is, truthful, balanced, credible, that type of thing. So I think that's very important. That's something we could support, either local communities, schools, the social media companies themselves, in sharing information with them so they can be more transparent to the audience.
Are you aware of any other governments that are ahead of us, or are doing this better, and that we might be able to take a page from their experience and look at adopting something similar?
Yeah, so the two that come to mind immediately are Finland and Estonia. Of course, two countries right on Russia's borders. Both have faced, a lot of Russian disinformation, and both have adopted, classes or courses on media literacy, starting even in elementary school, so that their population can make an informed decision when they are, subject to this disinformation.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning Estonia. Yeah, and we actually had a discussion with the former president of Estonia, Mr. Toomas Hendrik Ilves, and he said something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, and I don't want to make this sound too trivial, but it's almost as if the Estonia population, by virtue of their closeness to Russia, and also because of the cyber attacks that they experienced, I think it was the 2007-ish timeframe, but because of that, it's like they've developed some kind of, they've been inoculated, or they have collectively figured out, like, I don't think so. This is bogus. I'm not going to give it my time or attention. But it seems like something along those lines is needed, so that our citizenry is maybe a little bit less susceptible. But then you've got the stuff like the metaverse coming on, which just is like mainlining disinformation potentially, and the brain is so plastic that it doesn't know when it doesn't necessarily know that it's receiving bogus information, and if that bogus information is repeated over and over and over again for an extended period of time, it's just like a river cutting through rock. It'll just it'll cut a pathway, and that pathway is the pathway, and that becomes the truth, and holy cow, and then you're off to the races. So, but nevertheless, yeah, thanks for mentioning a couple of countries that we could look to as exemplars. Well, I'd like to start wrapping up, if I may, Todd. So I mean, this is one of those questions I like to ask people. If you were, to have an elevator ride with a really influential government official, what are the couple of things you'd like to communicate to this person relative to your area of expertise and information operations?
That's a great question. One, I would say, keep doing what we've been doing here in the last few months. I think being proactive in the case of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, forecasting, some of the intel that they were massing troops, that, they were intending to invade, just hammering that really took Russia's ability to come out and use some sort of false flag operation or fake provocation to try to justify their invasion. It took that off the table. And I think it also did a lot to convince our European allies and their population that Russia remains a threat and that they need to be more proactive in NATO and in the defense area. So I think that was a great bit of maybe a great information operation.
Sorry to interrupt, but it might have also just been a baby step towards reestablishing some trust between the U.S. government and the American people. I can remember that there was a reporter who really grilled a State Department spokesperson about communicating what we think Russia's doing, what they're going to do. This is what we think is going to happen. And this reporter was like, how do we know? I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, right. you guys lie all the time, come on. And the guy was like, we're telling you the truth. And so it sounded like they actually were telling the truth. And so maybe it's a little baby step towards rebuilding trust, which I think is pretty important too.
Yeah. But I think it's, that transparency again, right? And also, again, going back to my experience, we always had this debate. If we wanted to use a bit of intelligence, either to conduct some sort of cyber operation or some sort of information operation, that intelligence gain loss analysis, if we use this, we may lose our access to the source of the information. But information, again, we've seen how important it is in national security. If you don't use that information, what good is it? Right. So I think, being more open, being more willing to perhaps, disclose in an appropriate and measured manner information that we've gained, either again, highlighting, the adversary's actions or perhaps our own capabilities as a deterrent. I think that would be another thing. So making sure that the government agencies have the authorities, have the resources that they need to be able to do that. If you have to go back to the Pentagon every time before you release information, by the time you get that coordinated and approved, you've missed your window of opportunity. So we need to continue to be proactive.
Right. Excellent. Well, what's a good book that you could recommend to our audience, or it could be a journal article related to the kinds of things we're talking about, or anything that is a good resource related to IO?
Yeah, so I guess last year over the summer, I read Thomas Ridd's Active Measures. As someone who grew up in the Cold War, and kind of a history fan, I just found that fascinating, especially the way he tied some of the past, Soviet and U.S. actions to what's going on now. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. And then Peter Pomerantsev, I'm trying to remember the exact, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. And again, kind of give some insight into some of the Russian propaganda efforts and kind of the environment there that leads to, I guess, some of what they do in the information environment, or helps explain some of that. I think both of those are I found really interesting.
Excellent suggestions. Well, thanks a lot, Todd. You've given us a lot to think about for sure. And with that, Todd Huntley, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.